The Shop 3 Sheep Eater. Written and read by W.P. Thrift, who can be contacted at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. And cover art created by JD, contactable at Radix_L on Twitter. Chapter 16. Final Preparations. Lantis was laying down, relaxing on his bed as the clock ticked over to 5:30 a.m. He was stretched out on top of the covers, hands behind his head on the pillow, and one leg crossed over the other. He hadn't even tried to sleep this night. He just wanted to make himself scarce, as he felt terrible for what he had to say to Cassidy earlier. He'd listened for her to return to her room and planned to sneak back out after he heard her return. However, she never had, and now it was time for him to head outside and get ready for a day of training. Sitting up, yawning and stretching, he shot a death glare at the training boots he had been using for the past many months before putting them on. He still didn't like wearing anything on his feet, but he couldn't argue with the results. Then again, since he had started wearing boots and socks, he had felt the bottom of his feet growing weaker and softer. That was troubling, but there was nothing he could do about it. Peeking out his door to make sure the coast was clear, he quickly snuck out, down the hallway and down the stairs without making a peep. He pressed his back against a wall in the kitchen, next to the archway to the living room, and glanced around the corner slowly. He was surprised. Everyone was in the living room. Everyone, except for Cassidy, that is. They were watching TV at a low volume. Everyone looked half dead and completely exhausted. When he was certain Cassidy wasn't in there, he stepped around and let himself be seen. "Oh, hey there! Good morning, young'un," Mr. March said. "Finally decided to come down here and join us?" No," Lantis replied honestly. "Why is everyone up?" "Didn't figure it out when you tried to sleep?" Mr. March asked him. "Nobody can sleep anymore." "Oh, okay then," Lantis replied without any surprise, as though he was just told they got a new egg timer or something else mundane. "Well, I didn't even try to sleep last night. I can't sleep on most nights." "Say what now?" Mr. March found that to be very curious. He exchanged looks with Mrs. March, and the two of them began whispering to each other. They thought that no one else could hear them, but Lantis was able to pick something up from Mrs. March. "Do you think that he's more strongly attuned to Sheep Eater? Perhaps his body has been subconsciously preparing him for this day, all this time." It was just speculation, and it was also wrong. Lantis simply suffered from severe insomnia, but was able to fake restfulness, the way a functional drunk can fake sobriety. Lantis and Ray locked eyes for a moment while the Marches were chatting. Instead of either of them glancing away quickly as they usually would, they instead held their gaze for a long moment. What finally distracted Lantis into breaking eye contact with her was when he noticed Haley. She hadn't said her usual, "Good morning, Uncle Lantis," the way she had for the past 3 months. Haley was sitting alone on the love seat, staring absent-mindedly at the TV, looking incredibly distraught. Lantis assumed it had to do with her being unable to sleep, but like everyone else around here, he absolutely sucked at assumptions. Either way, it did somewhat bum him out to not be greeted so cheerfully by her. Hell, just 2 mornings ago, Christmas morning, he saw her acting more energetic and lively than he had ever seen anyone behave in his entire life. Lantis was headed out the door when Mr. March called back over to him, stopping him before he left. "Oh, wait a minute! Where are you going?" To get ready to train. Are you coming, old man?" Lantis replied. "We're not training today. In fact, your training's over. You're done," Mr. March said. What?" Lantis did actually act a little surprised by that. What do you mean? You just got through telling me the other day how much more I needed to learn.
Well, graduation came early, son,
Mr. March said.
There's, well, we'll need to talk about it more in a minute. The missus has got to go get all the plans out of our room. Then we'll need to find someplace private to discuss it. But your first mission as our successor begins tonight. And that means your training has officially come to an end.
If he's your successor, Ray considered, does that mean you two are finally going to retire and come home? Mr. March reluctantly shook his head.
Oh, well, we're not going on any more dangerous missions or anything like that, dear. So you don't have to worry about our safety anymore.
I never did, Ray said coldly, interrupting him. He chose to ignore that and continued.
But the intelligence community still needs us. Your mother and I have mastered a particular set of skills that still haven't been matched by anyone else. And even if we found a successor in the field, there's no such thing as a world where having too many sets of eyes watching over it ain't a good thing. I'm afraid, until we've proven incompetent to continue, we'll just have to keep working for the good of the planet.
She didn't believe what they did was nearly as important as they made it out to be, but she wouldn't call them out on it either. But that was only because she was so tired, not because she hadn't yet said her final word on this matter. Besides, she was used to them running off and leaving her alone. If they did anything else, the world would almost not even feel real to her anymore. So, I guess this means... I guess Lantis is going to be putting himself in danger from now on, huh? Ray asked. Mrs. March quickly replied to that.
Well, ideally, no. Not at all. This is a sneaking mission. If everything goes to plan, the enemy will never even know he's there. There's only one target, so he just has to get in and out quickly and quietly.
Oh, I see, Lantis said. All of this was news to him as well. And if he's caught? Ray asked.
He won't be.
But if he is?
Then, I doubt there's any army on Earth that could stop him, dear. After what Doug and I put him through,
Mrs. March assured her. How many people will be there? Ray pressed.
Looking at traffic out to the island, maybe 100? Oh, it's hard to say for sure.
Haley squirmed in her chair at the sound of that. They had just said that people would be there. Not that she thought any less of monsters compared to people, but her sister had said that there was only one monster by itself whom would be the target of Lantis. Now, Mrs. March hadn't said anything about him killing anyone, but Haley already knew the truth. They weren't going to talk about murder when she was right there in the room, but she caught on to their encoded adult language. So, her Uncle Lantis would be killing upwards of 100 people if things went wrong. That made her even sicker to her stomach than she had been before. That's so weird, Lantis said, and everyone suddenly gave him their attention, which startled him, but he continued. I don't know. I was just in a little happy rut here, you know? I wake up, I train, I do chores. It's weird for me to think that all that's going to change. Can anyone else do this mission? I would kind of like to keep up this life here for, just a little bit longer.
Oh, I'm afraid not, young'un,
Mr. March said.
Not at this late stage. There's nobody else on Earth that can do this as far as we know. And if we just sit around praying for a miracle to happen, that someone else will step in, well, we might as well be giving up the world to Sheep-Eater. 'Cause you do know that he plans to destroy the whole planet. Eh?
Ray cocked a brow. What the hell is a Sheep-Eater?
Oh, that's the monster in question, dearie,
Mrs. March said.
And don't let your father frighten you. It's really not as bad as the end of the world.
Mrs. March let her words trail off, as she knew that Ray could tell when she was lying. Of course, Ray didn't think it was so bad, but all the same, she still knew the way her mom was trying to soften the severity of the situation. "This is the same kind of monster that kept us up last night?" Ray asked, putting things together. Mr. March reluctantly nodded.
Kept everyone on Earth awake, most likely. I'm sure the morning news will cover it when it comes on. The world will stay awake. Everyone's very essence of sleep itself will be devoured by this creature until he stopped.
Suddenly, Ray grew worried. There was a monster out there that had learned to do something like this? Of course, it was much worse than she thought, but she had no idea that Sheep-Eater planned to replace the Earth itself, killing everyone in a fiery, crushing apocalypse, far before sleep deprivation could claim anyone. Lantis was going to ask if they could do it instead of him, not knowing the madness they'd both risk falling into if they did so. But he didn't ask, because if they left, that would also be an interruption of his current way of life. So either way, this was all really going to end for him. If that were the case, he might as well be the one that goes. Not like he had anything else planned for the afternoon if training was over. "Well then, if I'm really about to go, I'm gonna go say goodbye to the chickens. They'll miss me, you know," Lantis announced, then headed back towards the door.
Would you like some coffee before you go? This morning is going to be your last chance to relax for quite a while,
Mrs. March said. Ray flinched at that. The reality of what her parents had been saying was slowly sinking in, and her gut began to swarm with butterflies at the thought of what Lantis was about to have to do. She knew that this is what he had been training for, but it never even approached feeling real to her until right now. Yet, she still hadn't even imparted to him just how much she cared, just how worried for him she would be. That's what she had come here to do. That was her entire purpose for being here, and she had failed to do even that. "Oh, nah, no thank you," Lantis replied. I don't like coffee. It's too bitter." While the Marches had spoken fairly openly about the mission in the living room, they had saved the nitty-gritty details for when they had Lantis alone in their room later that day. They both felt like this house was a safe place for them to be open about who they were and what they did. But there were some things that they had to keep an absolute secret except on a need-to-know basis. The first thing they did when Lantis got there was to give him his new suit, as his days in the training jumpsuit were now over. "Oh, fucking badass!" Lantis gasped when he saw what they presented to him. It had been hanging on a steel coat rack in their closet for a couple months now. He was supposed to have been given the opportunity to run around in it before now, but they never did get to the set of lessons which would involve him wearing it. Alas, that was one more thing they would never be able to get around to doing. It was his stealth suit, solid black, made from thick leather. It covered almost his entire body except for his face and hair. It even had a turtleneck, which was thick enough to keep most blades from slicing his throat. The boots were surprisingly flexible, as though he were wearing nothing on his feet at all, save for the steel toes they ended in. The steel was painted black so as not to stand out. The other accessories included a thick black bandana, which covered his forehead, and a riot-grade Kevlar armor vest to wear over the suit. Everything was waterproof and built to seal up cuts and stop the bleeding by tightening up and providing pressure over injuries by reacting to blood being spilt within the suit. They pulled out a body mirror for him to look himself over, and after marveling at the overall appearance, he took to staring at his own butt as he turned around, an object of interest which superseded his caring about any other details of the suit as the Marches tried to explain all of its functionalities to him in great detail.
"We can truly say on this day,"
Mrs. March stated,
that solid biscuit is born.
Oh, no, Lantis grumbled, not liking that name.
Well, just solid then?
Mrs. March asked.
We have to give you some kind of code name.
Oh, just Biscuit then, maybe, Lantis shrugged, still not taking his eyes off his own butt in the mirror until the Marches realized it was too much of a distraction for him and turned the mirror around. Ah! Lantis protested them turning the mirror. They laid out a map of Rayleigh, which they warned him was based on distorted satellite imagery, and until recently photos of the island were impossible to take. They walked him through the steps they had planned, and informed him that Liquid would be joining him. Who? Lantis asked.
Liquid Biscuit? Your brother?
Oh, that's a dumb name. What's his real name?
We can't tell you that. It's on a need-to-know basis only,
Mr. March declared. Well, then he's just got to go by Liquid then. Codename Biscuit's already taken.
He already just went by Liquid.
Their driver from many months ago would be returning here at 7 p.m. sharp to drive him to the docks, where he would exit the car without it even stopping several blocks away and run to the dock, meeting up with Liquid at 9 p.m. sharp. They'd steal a boat and take off for the island, arriving in 3 days, going at top speed. From there, it was a simple process of getting in, assassinating Sheep-Eater, and getting out.
Bowman will be your radio contact for this mission,
Mr. March began.
But me and Pam will also be on standby the entire time if he needs us. We've already sent a courier to find him and deliver all of the mission details and intelligence to him. He'll know everything that we do,
Mrs. March said.
It is funny, though. Back in the day, the electronic wiring of information was the safest route. These days, there are so many hackers that physical copies are the way to go if you want security. We have a radio system set up here so that you can communicate with Bowman,
Mr. March said, opening a large briefcase to reveal all kinds of devices within it. Oh, no, I'm good, Lantis told him. I already have nanomachines injected into me, so I can contact him at any time.
You do?
Mr. March was surprised.
All right! I nearly forgot you two were in operations way before the missus and I found you.
At least, that's the story they were told, and it still sounded way more believable than the truth, that he and Bowman had only gotten started, and Bowman had used his technological wizardry to forge the nanomachines out of a bottle cap and copper wiring, just for the sake of a cheap fart joke. But the end result was the same. Lantis could remotely communicate with Bowman. Mrs. March still looked worried.
I just wish we could have been more involved. But I'm sure you and Bowman have your own special way of doing things on missions. You two have worked together for so long at this point, of course. We wouldn't want to interfere with your process. But Liquid will be right there with you the whole time. He's more accustomed to our way of doing things, after all, so he'll bring all of our experiences with him. And as long as nothing bad happens to him, he will be able to guide you and keep you safe.
Pam, Mr. March said.
We both know that Lantis is plenty capable of taking care of himself. Oh, I know that,
Mrs. March said.
I just wish that there was more time, that you didn't have to take off so abruptly. But like we explained, time is of the essence. The world is in danger now, and if you succeed, it'll mean you're one of just 10 people who've successfully truly saved the planet from absolute destruction.
Oh, neat, Lantis said.
10 people, dear?
Mr. March asked.
Oh, yes, I'm including the guy that failed to save us, then turned back time to bring the Earth back into existence,
Mrs. March replied.
Oh, that guy. Yeah, I know.
Mr. March nodded. Wait, the what now? Lantis asked.
Oh, for him to turn back time, he had to sacrifice his own life,
Mr. March replied. Oh, well, that's a stupid power to have, Lantis said. All of Lantis's weapons and tools were laid out for him on the bed, to inspect before sheathing away. 2 6-inch hunting knives, straight blade in the front, serrated on the back, were placed into his left and right boot. A third knife, smaller and with only a straight edge, was placed horizontally onto his left hip. 2 handguns, both suppressed .22 pistols, were holstered on his back and right hip, respectively. There was a rope as thin as dental floss, but the Marches swore it could hold 1,000 pounds without breaking, for a little while at least. It was strictly to be used for descending, no way to grapple it up onto anything. It was placed onto a compartment on his belt, along with binoculars, a couple compact flares, a compass, and a hook he was told could be used to attach a rope when scaling down a cliff, though he didn't actually know how it worked. "Do I get a laser pen?" Lantis asked.
"Oh, well, you did,"
Mrs. March began.
"But somebody just had to be playing with it in the bathroom and accidentally dropped it in the toilet. Oh, now, honey, we decided we wouldn't tell him about that,"
Mr. March said, embarrassed. The hour grew late, and the driver would be here soon. So they exited the room to go back down into the house and allow Lantis to say his goodbyes to everyone. The Marches would be staying here through the rest of the mission, and then they would be off to some secret, remote location once more. Cassidy was back inside the house, looking normal. Perhaps even a bit happy. That was entirely a mask. She had had the time to still herself up for Lantis's sake, not wanting him to go away with hurting her still on his mind. If something bad happened to him, she would never forgive herself if she thought for even a second it was because he was distracted due to their chat last night. She wasn't mad at him. She didn't hate him. Quite the opposite. She was terrified at the thought that she would always love him, so she had to put her own feelings aside, just long enough to see him off. Then she could go back to her self-pity and loathing. Ray was, dangerously, the only other person waiting with her down in the kitchen. Neither of them knew where Haley was, and her presence would have gone a long way towards making both of them feel a lot more comfortable right now. Luckily, they had managed to wait in uncomfortable silence, not saying anything to one another. "Check this shit out!" Lantis immediately shouted when he saw them, then flexed for them in his new stealth suit. Their jaws hit the floor, stunned. Yes, he did in fact look cool in this outfit, which was a stark difference from how he usually dressed. But mostly they were surprised to see him boasting about anything. Okay, mostly they were struck by how sexy he was in the suit. But who's really keeping score?
"Oh, be more humble than that, young'un,"
Mr. March shouted at him, smacking him upside his head. "Never!" Lantis shot back. Ray fought and tried to think of a flippant insult to hurl at the suit, but even she couldn't come up with one that could stick.
"Now you look very nice,"
Cassidy finally told him. "Nice? He looks fucking dangerous!" Ray said, jumping up from the table after a long, stunned moment to step over and get a closer look.
"Ray!"
Mrs. March scolded. "What?" she shot back, then realized what. "Oh, come on! You didn't yell at Lantis for cussing?"
"Lantis isn't my daughter!"
Mrs. March shot back. "Well, I barely am," Ray pouted, glancing away.
"Ray, now's not the time for this,"
Mrs. March said sternly.
"You need to say your goodbyes to Lantis. He might be going away for a long time."
Ray cringed, blushing. Of all times for her mom to embarrass her, it just had to be now. But she wouldn't fight her, couldn't fight her, because she had one last chance to salvage this moment, so that Lantis's last thought of her wouldn't be her getting spoken to like a child in front of her mom. "Dashi," Lantis said slowly, accidentally calling her by that again. He hadn't meant to. She glanced up at him, and for a moment all emotions seemed to melt away from both of them as they stared at each other in silence. Cassidy watched this. Smile on her face, rage in her heart. She knew how they both felt about each other, but realized, right in this moment, that neither one of them knew what she did. Ray had known all day that Lantis was shipping out tonight, and this might be the last time she would get to see him. Fate's willing, that wouldn't be the case. But it was possible. Yet, Ray never acted on that. She never worked up the courage to tell Lantis how she felt. Cassidy took that as just one more sign that she was stronger than Ray, and that Ray would never be a fit for someone like him. It was a small consolation prize, and one that she had rather not have had. It just made her feel sicker. They could hear a car pulling up in the driveway. A horn honked. Lantis and Ray broke eye contact without a word. Everyone stepped outside to follow Lantis to the car, but Lantis froze, ran back up onto the porch and stuck his head inside the house and called out, "Yo, Haley! Haley!" "Oh, I already checked for her," Cassidy told him. I don't know where she's gotten off to." "Then I gotta go find her," Lantis said, jumping back down off the porch and looking towards the barn.
"Now, I hate to stop you, but you do got a pretty strict schedule to keep,"
Mr. March told him.
"I'll let her know that you were thinking about her, though. Don't you worry."
Lantis didn't like this at all, but after an extended look towards the barn, he nodded. Then he headed to join the group gathered beside the black, nondescript car. Mr. March opened the back door of the car for him. Mrs. March made a big deal about hugging Lantis as he went past.
"Now you take care out there, okay? We could not have asked for a better student than you."
Mr. March pitched in.
"You did us both proud. Now get out there and whoop that monster's butt."
Cassidy also hugged him, though his cold, leathery suit of armor was strangely off-putting. It felt as though she were squeezing a statue. "Now you're always welcome to come back here any time, you hear?" Cassidy told him.
"Don't you be a stranger."
"Yeah, okay," Lantis replied. Ray, lastly, glanced away, not sure what to say. Ray," Lantis said to her, suddenly remembering something. "I packed my stuff up, but I don't have anywhere to keep it. Would you mind keeping it for me? I could stop by your place again to pick it back up the next time I'm in Cattailville." Ray fought back a gasp. He wanted to come see her first thing when he got back? But why? She didn't know.
What?"
Mr. March said.
"I was going to have my courier."
Mrs. March quickly stomped his foot to interrupt him.
"Oh, of course Ray will take care of that stuff for you, won't you, dear?" "The hell'd you do that for, woman?"
Mr. March shouted, outraged and holding his foot, hopping up and down on the other one. Mrs. March rolled her eyes. Her husband was so clueless here. Yeah, of course I'll take care of it." Ray agreed sheepishly. Lantis got into the back seat of the car and closed the door. And with that, he was off down that same dirt road he had ran and walked down so many times. But this time, it would be to keep going, leaving the McCoys' real Georgia Peaches farm, possibly forever. But one more set of eyes watched Lantis's exit. From the loft of the barn, Haley sat and watched him leave through a crack between two boards. She shook, holding herself tight. "What did they do to you, Uncle Lantis?" Haley asked softly, tears running down her cheeks. "They shouldn't have done this. They shouldn't have turned you into a killer. You're not a killer, Uncle Lantis. It's not right what they did. It's not right that they did that. You were too nice. You were too good. It's a sin. What they did to you, it's a sin." And then the car had driven off, out of her view. She sobbed until she gave herself the hiccups, but there was nothing she could do. Nobody would listen to her when she told them not to let him do this, that it was wrong to do this. Yet, everyone had simply paid her no mind, acted like she didn't know what she was talking about. And she hated them all for this, and she had never felt so very alone in this world before, except for the day that she had lost her parents. That concludes Chapter 16 of Sheep Eater. Tune in every Tuesday for new chapters, and please subscribe to be notified the moment they're released. If you would like to reach me, you can do so at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. That's LANTISARMSTRONG. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's chapter, The Twin Biscuits.